the way that people are going to price SaaS, it's all going to change. It's all getting disrupted.
What's one piece of advice you would give finance leaders scaling their team?
Hiring is always a challenge. And I think that with finance, you kind of need to make sure they are succeed. Like you need that success rate to be high because it takes a lot of time to get some of these people up to speed.
What's one trend in finance and accounting that you believe will shape the next 5 years?
I'm going to pick the obvious one, which is the whole AI agentic chat stuff, because we're going to be in a world where we're talking to our spreadsheets for a certain portion of the way that we work with them. And that to me is pretty exciting.
My main phrase when it comes about AI is the future is here, just not evenly distributed. And there's already a glimpse of what everyone will be doing in the next few years.
There's a lot happening, which makes our lives pretty fun as well as more of a challenge. It's a great time to be in it.
You're listening to the 10X Finance Podcast. Quick, candid conversations with the people shaping modern finance. Hosted by Albert Gozzi.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 10X Finance Podcast, where we dive into the real challenges and opportunities shaping modern finance teams. I'm Albert Gozzi, co-founder and CEO at Aleph, and today I'm joined by Johnnie Walker, co-founder at Ruled. Johnnie, it's great to have you here. Are you ready to jump in?
Yeah, very much so. Excited to be here. Thank you, Albert.
Always a pleasure to spend time with you on this. So Johnnie, before we jump into your hot take, would love if you can give a 30-second background of yourself and Ruled for those out there that might not know you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm Johnnie. I'm one of the co-founders of Ruled. My background actually does start off in engineering, which I think is some of the topics that we're going to get into is actually of some benefit, the way that finance is evolving at the moment with all the technology. But yeah, fast forward through, I did fractional CFO work. 10 years ago, I found my way into temp CFO, which was the precursor, if you like, to Ruled. Same team. So we created Ruled about 4 or 5 years ago. We do outsourced accounting and finance for almost exclusively venture-backed startups. I say almost because there's always some things that we do in excess to that. But our expertise is really in audit-ready financials for venture-backed companies from pre-seed all the way through Series C, Series D.
Perfect. So, Johnnie, what's your finance hot take?
So I think we've in the last 10 years plus, like you've seen this very established rubric around SaaS and the billing and financials and revenue, etc., and how people think about it from a pricing and license management standpoint. And what's really, and I think this is very evident now with the progress of last year, is that whole dynamic is changing. That the way that people are going to price SaaS or the way that you price a service and a platform going to a customer, it's all going to change. It's all getting disrupted. And that's what's really exciting. It's moving towards true value for the customer and it's moving towards usage-based, consumption-based pricing. That then is partly driven by the changing substrate on which we are actually delivering the business. So all the AI models become very usage-oriented in their cost base. And that is just going to make the whole world for finance 10 times more difficult. Because it's all about predictability. It's all about, revenue and the cost base. Like, how are you actually going to forecast revenue when you can't rely upon a recurring revenue for the next 12 months on some base level? So I think that to me is going to, I think we're starting to realize it now, and it's going to be a really exciting time. I think exciting, scary.
Yeah, exciting and scary. And I agree. And I think there's a few angles to break this down. So I would love to go and talk a little bit about each. I think there's what that means for finance as the one forecasting revenue. I think there's a flip side of what it means for finance for forecasting cost, because all of a sudden, your team uses more certain product, you get charged more, it's positive ROI, so it's fine. And then there's also something for finance as buyers, even like buying themselves software and like how the CFO stack. Where maybe let's start. You were talking a bit about like the forecasting revenue. How do you think that will change? And I think, do you think there's something to learn there from other usage-based models that exist today to like take that into account?
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid point because definitely, making this a hot take as if this is happening now, obviously that move towards sort of consumption and usage base has been occurring. Like HubSpot's a great example. Base platform fee, and then there's a usage element based upon, contact records or whatever in addition to that. So it's a way to make in between coarse granular levels of pricing, it makes this sort of incremental usage. It gives you a bit extra that you're willing to pay for in the product. So I think that generally has been happening already. But I think when you look at doing financial modeling, you're always trying to figure out how do I simplify? And you're looking to bucket customers up. And that might be from, current activity. You're trying to understand like how are things working right now. And if you really want to try and get simple, especially when you're doing first iteration, you're looking for, small, medium and large customers. And in the SaaS world where it was just pure, there's the revenue per year that translates in MRR, you kind of just bucketed it up and chose like an average for what the ARR would be on a customer size level. Bang, you're done. Now, what you've got is, I think very reasonably, there's quite a distribution of actual revenue underneath those categories. And that's where all this usage, you might have a base platform fee, but then you've got this incremental usage on top. And that's where I think you've got, you're going to, the actual challenge of projections becomes one of really trying to look into that crystal ball to see how might the actual customer usage or adoption of these platforms actually pan out. And I think adoption is another very key thing. Like you can, in those worlds, your revenue is very much tied to how much your customer uses the platform, to how effective are they actually at adopting the platform that they buy. It's no longer suitable to just convince them of a sale, get it in, and obviously there's a churn possibility after a year if they don't use it, but your revenue is going to adjust in that 12-month period or whatever your license period is if they don't use the platform. So you've got variability across like a whole bunch of dimensions now. And that, I think, at a point in projecting financials for a company, if you don't have much track record to go on, you're in this realm of like really trying to dream up these different categories to try and simplify it. And that I think is it's an order of magnitude harder to do that now than what it was previously. If you do have track record, then you've got, I think there it's going to be fundamental that you have the data, available data that you can use to summarize up. And I think that's, where obviously Aleph is going to be absolutely essential, is in collating those different data sources so that you can start to, it's not just finance data. You can't just trust what ends up in the ledger. You've got to look at a level beyond that into the source data systems for utilization and everything to actually then categorize these buckets up to use those in projections. So I think the revenue, just generally, it's going to become up. Projections and managing it's just going to become a lot more complex.
I think it's very interesting, and I don't know if you have thought about this, but if not, like we can even brainstorm on it together. And I think it might be interesting for the audience that might want to nerd out on these topics. Is how would you actually forecast this? I think how would you structure the model would be my question. Part of my mind goes to, okay, yeah, you can use machine learning, right? Like there's a version of this that is very sophisticated, but it's probably not how I would start. I'm a big fan of keeping things as simple as possible. So yeah, do you have thoughts on how would you model something like this?
I mean, I think kind of, it's a little bit back to, the sort of, in a way, the examples that I was giving there where, prior to now, you'd think of it something as coarse grained, certainly at initial stage of, bucket and the customers are small, medium, large. You might have distribution channels that have distinctly different economics associated with them. Because I think very quickly after revenues, you get into cost. Like that's your other domain that kind of is your source of differentiation or bucketing things up. And so I think so revenue and customer size is one thing, but very quickly you're like, oh, how do their dynamics and cost differ? So then, because you're getting through to that gross profit line, that top line margin that you really want to focus on to then plan for the rest of the business. So I think, I'm going to keep saying it again. It's like this categorization and bucketing, which is hard. I always look at financial models like, of course you can go down the road of Monte Carlo and having sort of statistics and sort of having formulas that might describe sort of certain clients and coming up with distributions. I think in those, great, adopting those, super, but I've always looked towards having a strong degree of dependence or reliability in the models. Like if I put this certain number of inputs in, if I put those inputs in, I get those inputs out. And it's kind of like the way that you stress test or error check a model, because you always know this is like my test inserts or inputs. And then with those, I know for categorically I'm going to get this out. And that's how you kind of, as you're updating the model, which might be adding new components or sheets to it, like how do you verify that you've done that right? And I think I'd almost hedge against, I always hedge against. Your point there, I think, is so true. Keep it simple, because as simple as you possibly can, because going beyond that and creating too much complexity becomes unmanageable. So yeah, I don't know how to sort of qualify any more than the revenue side. I think it's just every situation is going to be a bit different, but bucketing still applies. It's just going to be a more complex projection basis, I think.
So maybe the bucket is going to be, this is the group of, US mid-market that has like high activity within this persona of customers. And like, it's kind of like similar to more of a cohort analysis, but the cohort becomes not necessarily a time-based cohort, like, not a cohort time-based, but more of like a group of that plus the characteristics within that group.
Completely. And I think you've got that added, the churn, as we thought about it traditionally, results from dissatisfaction in the product or, business stress on this part of the customer. But usually you attribute it to dissatisfaction. And that dissatisfaction is kind of now measured in lack of utility of the product. So you have this measure that I think needs to exist in the financial model, which is how much are you expecting the customer to use the product? And that I think very closely related to the way you might model a churn, but is more fine-grained now, because that is going to show up as a revenue and cost differential in the period of a license. I think you're still going to be selling. You want to lock people into a period, but it's not, you don't get churn at the end. It's like you've got lack of utility or utilization partway through. I think there you're going to, you can imagine now with a financial model, it's not just, sales and like how's it leading through to invoicing and then revenue results from that. You've also got this historical activity usage on a per customer basis that you're rolling in to look at your next 1, 2, 3 months. I don't think that's going to change. Your job is to be accurate 1, 2, 3 months out, really accurate, because that shows that you really have a solid understanding of how the business is operating.
Yeah, and I think this highlights again the importance of data and how like finance teams will need to go into product usage data and like other data sources that might be a little bit outside today.
Yeah, exactly.
One question, Johnny, I know we need to move towards wrapping and the rapid fire soon. Maybe the one final question that I would love to get your take on is, what does it mean for finance as a buyer? And we as a company at Left, we sell to CFOs, and I've had some of these conversations already, and there's a general adversity to variability and risk. And I sometimes do wonder, I chat with people, whether finance is going to be later to adopt this type of pricing, even if it's better for everyone. There's some like scary component about engaging with a vendor and not knowing how much you're going to pay next month, let alone next year. How do you think about that? And what will it take to say, okay, I'm a CFO and I'm happy to say this could be 0 or could be like 100, and I don't know where it's going to fall?
Yeah. No, I think it's, I don't know of any of all the companies I've talked to, had interaction with, worked with or whatever. I can't think of any finance department that I would say has excess budget to spend. Like it is the department in a company that has the least amount of money to spend on tools and resources. So I think you start off with that as like your baseline. And then, so it's a hard graph to actually get anything approved. And I don't think it's just because of internal, it's just like there isn't a perceived value from a business growth or profitability standpoint to spending money on finance. And, or it's very difficult to justify it. And so I think that first of all, you got that. And the second is, I think if you've got variability in pricing attributed to usage or whatever, you're going to have to be really clear. Will I get the benefit from that additional cost? And I think that's where the challenge is, both as a buyer, but also as a vendor. If you say, well, I'm selling my platform and, this is how the cost will change based upon what you do with it, where it's going to have to be patently clear and proven out that you as the customer are going to get whatever consequential benefit it is that you think, you assume, and you're being told is going to happen. You have to be absolutely certain that's going to happen. And that, I think there's going to be so much focus on that, I think, to get finance teams across the line with that kind of pricing, basically.
Yeah, the bar for ROI will be much higher than maybe other areas that might be a little bit less scrupulous with their spending.
Agreed. Yep. Yeah, because I don't think you might see some other departments as a bit of a bucket of just to spend money and something all good always happens. Finance doesn't have that benefit.
As we go towards wrapping, Johnny, we like to do this rapid fire. 3 questions, short answers. First one coming is, what's one mistake you see finance teams make over and over again?
Yeah. And it's funny. It's the one I thought of in this is actually change management, and it's the adoption of tools. And so, like, in a way, it's a little bit contradictory to what I might have said. There's so much focus on what it is that you buy and proving it out. And I think what actually happens quite a lot of the time is that people will make the decision to buy or invest in something, and then the thesis on which you bought that doesn't then transpire. And we've seen that like countless times with some of the big ERP platforms, which will remain unnamed. There's a lot of complexity in executing on those. There's a lot of cost. And I would say the vast majority of them say that they don't achieve what they expected to achieve. So I'd say that happens a lot. And I think with this world now, where you've got a whole myriad of new platforms appearing on the market, the thing that I think will trip people up more often than not is just, will they look back after 12 months or whatever and say, did I get what I wanted from that purchase of this product? And that's the change management is not something that happens, organically or just without attention. You need to make very concerted, clear efforts to make sure that it's being used, that you're monitoring the usage of it, that you're encouraging, that you're training. All that stuff takes a lot. We actually did on our podcast, Speaking C-Suite, with Katie Royce at Zen Business. Phenomenal overview from hers. Obviously, she's rolled out a lot of different technology in her career, and it's a fantastic description of the challenges around that.
Nice. I'm gonna refrain from commenting, but I agree on a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah.
But to keep the rapid fire moving, what's one piece of advice you would give finance leaders scaling their team?
Yeah. So it's, I think it's what I would say, hiring at any point, this is going to be second nature to you being CEO of a fast growing startup. Hiring is always a challenge. And I think that with finance, there's a lot of eyeballs, I think, on the success of hires. Like, it's difficult to hire, unless your team is big. If you're hiring your first 3, 4, 5 people, you kind of need to make sure they are succeed. Like, you need that success rate to be high, because it takes a lot of time to get some of these people up to speed. And they're very integral to the business. They become these components that, upon which the business actually relies. So I think it's just hire well, and that's through network. In fact, I'd say more often than not, when I look at people bringing finance team hires into companies, almost always it's a prior network connection, or by being introduced to the investors. That they look for a lot of real, not guarantees, but sort of comfort through the connections that they have. And that's, I think, I can't say there's no better way to hire. I mean, that's the way we do it. So I think the hiring is the quality of hiring really will dictate, I think, success.
Yeah. People underestimate how hard it is sometimes. So I agree. Final one. What's one trend in finance and accounting that you believe will shape the next 5 years?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to pick the obvious one, which is the whole AI agentic chat stuff, because I literally did just get off a call with your colleague Chibu, and we were talking about the Cloud Code Excel integration. And I think now moving towards this UI where you are not, our focus, and perhaps yours as well, was a lot on like, how efficient are you in Excel using shortcuts? How quickly could you move around? We're going to be in a world where we're talking to our spreadsheets for a certain portion of the way that we work with them. And that, I think that's going to unfold over the course of the next 12, 24 months. And that to me is pretty exciting. I think that natural language interaction with our data and the way that we structure our calculations, I think is exciting. Will it change how we do things in the next 12 months? No, but I think it's an important trend that is really just like completely aligned with everything else that's going on with thing and so on. But yeah, that's going to be a fun one.
For sure. And I think like always my main phrase when it comes about AI is this idea of the future is here, just not evenly distributed. And how much, if you go and if you dig deeper and if you're curious, like the top finance teams or top teams out there are doing things very, very differently today. There's already a glimpse of what everyone will be doing in the next few years.
Yep.
Which is interesting.
I think it is. It's as I've said to multiple people, it's a very cool time to be in finance and accounting right now. Like, there's a lot happening, which makes our lives pretty fun as well as more of a challenge. But it's a great time to be in it.
Yeah. Johnny, This has been great. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Albert. Always a pleasure. Really good to see you.
That's it for this episode of the 10X Finance Podcast, bringing you sharp, real-world finance conversations powered by Aleph. Learn more at getaleph.com. That's GETALEPH.com.